In 1964, archaeologists working near ancient Sparta uncovered something that forced them to stop digging. Inside a well shaft, they found bones, not just a few, dozens of infant skeletons, tiny skulls, some fractured, small spines twisted in unnatural ways. Many of the bones belonged to babies who had lived only a few days. For decades, historians believed they already knew the explanation. The story had been repeated again and again. Sparta, people said, inspected every newborn. If a baby appeared weak or deformed, it was thrown into a pit called the apothetai. Textbooks printed the story. Documentaries repeated it. Hollywood films like 300 even opened with it. But the bones found in that well created a serious problem for that story. Because mixed in with the infant remains were bones from adults, men, women, people who had clearly lived full lives before dying. And that raises an uncomfortable question. What kind of society would dump newborn babies and grown adults in the same place? The answer forces us to rethink everything we think we know about Sparta. Not the cinematic version, not the heroic legend, but the real system that shaped a 7-year-old boy named Leonidas into the man who would lead 300 fathers to a narrow mountain pass in northern Greece, knowing none of them would return. And it might also explain why, 2,500 years later, we still aren't entirely sure what we're supposed to admire about them. To understand Leonidas, we first need to understand what Sparta was built on. Around the 8th century BC, Sparta conquered a neighboring region called Messenia. The people living there, known as Messenians, were not slaughtered. They were not expelled. Instead, they were enslaved. They became what the Spartans called helots. Helots worked the land. They farmed the grain. They harvested olives. They raised livestock. They produced the food that fed every Spartan citizen. Without the helots, Sparta did not eat. And the helots greatly outnumbered the Spartans. Ancient sources give different estimates, but some suggest there were 7 helots for every Spartan citizen. Others place the number even higher. The exact ratio is debated, but the imbalance is not. And that imbalance created the single biggest problem Sparta ever faced. The entire Spartan system depended on a population that had every reason to rebel. The Messenians had not chosen this life. They had been conquered. They remembered that, and they waited. Eventually, they revolted. In the 7th century BC, the Second Messenian War nearly destroyed Sparta. Ancient writers describe a desperate conflict where Sparta came dangerously close to collapse. The poet Tyrtaeus wrote songs urging Spartan soldiers to hold the line, not against a foreign empire, but against the very people working their own fields. Sparta survived, but the experience terrified them. After the revolt, Sparta reorganized its entire society around a single goal: preventing another rebellion. Every law, every institution, every tradition, all of it served one calculation. How can a few thousand citizens permanently control a population that outnumbers them many times over? Sparta's solution was radical. They would turn their entire society into a machine for producing soldiers. Sparta had no city walls. Instead, it relied on something else. A population trained from childhood to be obedient, disciplined, and utterly fearless. At the age of 7, Spartan boys were taken away from their families. This was not optional. Every male citizen entered a state training system called the agoge. For the next 13 years, the state would control nearly every aspect of their lives. The boys were organized into groups called agilae, meaning herds, not classes, not teams, herds. Each boy received only one cloak per year, no shoes, no bedding. They slept on reeds they had to pull from riverbanks themselves, using their bare hands. Food was deliberately limited, not because Sparta lacked resources, but because hunger was part of the training. The boys were expected to steal food to survive, but the rule was very specific. If a boy successfully stole food and avoided detection, he was not punished. But if he was caught, he was beaten, not for stealing, for getting caught. The lesson was clear. Success mattered. Failure brought pain. One story recorded by the historian Plutarch illustrates the mentality Sparta tried to create. A Spartan boy once stole a fox cub and hid it beneath his cloak. When an adult approached, the boy froze. The fox began clawing and biting into his stomach. The boy did not move. He did not cry out. He remained silent. Eventually, the animal tore open his abdomen, and the boy died standing there. Whether the story is literally true or not almost doesn't matter, because Spartans repeated it to each other as an example. What mattered most was not strength, not intelligence, but the ability to hide pain. As the boys grew older, the training intensified. They fought each other in organized brawls, punching, kicking, biting. There were no rules. Adults did not intervene. The purpose wasn't simply to find the strongest fighter. It was to discover who would continue fighting after the pain became unbearable. Another ritual took place at the altar of Artemis or Thea. Here, boys were publicly whipped. This was not punishment. It was ceremony. The whipping continued until blood covered the altar. The measure of success was silence. Some boys even died during the ritual. Visitors from other Greek cities sometimes traveled to Sparta just to watch it happen. By the time a Spartan reached the age of 18, he had spent over a decade inside a system designed to produce something very specific. Not philosophers, not artists, not independent thinkers, but men capable of enduring pain without hesitation. Men who would obey orders without question. Men who could stand shoulder to shoulder in a phalanx formation, carrying heavy bronze armor in the summer heat, and never break rank even if the man beside them died. This was the system that produced Leonidas. He entered it at 7, and by the time he finished, he had lived almost his entire life under state control. Every meal, every punishment, every act of violence, all carefully designed. And the state had only one purpose for him: war. But there was one part of Spartan training rarely mentioned in popular stories. It was called the crypteia, and it reveals something far darker about Spartan society. The darker side of Spartan training had a name. It was called the crypteia. Each year, Spartan officials selected the most capable young men from the agoge. These were the strongest, the most disciplined, the ones who had proven they could endure hardship without complaint. But instead of rewarding them, Sparta gave them a different assignment. They were sent into the countryside alone, at night, armed only with a dagger. No armor, no supplies. Their mission was simple: move through Helot territory and eliminate anyone who looked dangerous. Strong men, confident leaders, anyone who might organize resistance. The young Spartans hid during the day and moved at night. They watched fields, they watched roads, and when they saw a helot who seemed capable of leadership, they killed him. This wasn't random violence, it was policy. Every year, Spartan officials known as the ephors made a formal declaration of war against the helots. The purpose was legal. In Greek religious tradition, killing someone during peacetime created spiritual pollution. By declaring war annually, Sparta ensured that killing helots would never violate religious law. The Crypteia turned young Spartan warriors into instruments of terror. Its goal was not to fight rebellion. It was to prevent rebellion from ever forming. One incident recorded by the historian Thucydides reveals how far Sparta was willing to go. During the Peloponnesian War, the Spartans made an announcement. They said helots who had served bravely in battle should come forward to be honored. Around 2,000 men stepped forward. They were crowned with garlands. They were paraded through temples. And then they disappeared. Every single one of them. No historian could explain exactly how they were killed, but the logic was clear. Competence in a slave population was dangerous, and Sparta removed danger before it could organize. This is the context that usually disappears from heroic stories about Leonidas and the 300. The Spartans were not simply warriors trained for foreign wars. They were products of a system built primarily for internal control. The discipline that made them effective soldiers also made them effective enforcers. And the skills they used against foreign enemies were the same ones they practiced on helot farmers in the dark. Another commonly repeated fact about Sparta is that Spartan women had more freedom than women in other Greek cities. And in many ways this is true. Spartan women could own property. They could inherit land. They exercised in public. They ran, wrestled, and trained physically. Compared to Athens, where women rarely appeared in public life, Spartan women seemed remarkably independent. But that freedom had a specific purpose. Sparta believed strong women produced strong children. Physical training for women was meant to improve childbirth and strengthen future soldiers. Marriage customs reflected the same logic. On their wedding night, Spartan brides had their heads shaved and were dressed in men's clothing. The groom, who had spent nearly his entire life living among men in military barracks, would visit his wife secretly at night, then return to the barracks before morning. Men under the age of 30 were required to continue living with their military groups. Some husbands reportedly fathered children before they had ever seen their wives clearly in daylight. And if a marriage failed to produce children, the state intervened. Older husbands could allow younger men to impregnate their wives. Men who admired another citizen's wife could request permission to father children with her. These arrangements were not scandals, they were policy. In Sparta, reproduction was treated as a matter of state interest. Families were secondary. What mattered was maintaining the population of future soldiers. The system needed boys. Boys who would enter the agoge. Boys who would survive training. Boys who would stand in the phalanx. And that brings us to Thermopylae. In 480 BC, the Persian Empire under King Xerxes launched one of the largest military invasions the ancient world had ever seen. Ancient historian Herodotus claimed the Persian army numbered over 1 million soldiers. Modern historians believe the real number was likely between 100,000 and 300,000, still enormous by ancient standards. Xerxes intended to conquer Greece and avenge the earlier Persian defeat at the Battle of Marathon. The Greek city-states knew the invasion was coming. They tried to prepare. But Sparta faced a problem. Two important religious events were happening at the same time: the Olympic Games and a Spartan festival called the Carneia. Spartan religious law forbade military campaigns during the festival. Breaking the rule would violate sacred tradition. So Sparta sent 300 soldiers. Not because 300 was enough, not because Leonidas believed they could defeat an empire, but because 300 was the largest force Sparta could legally deploy without breaking its own religious laws. And Leonidas did not march alone. He marched with roughly 7,000 Greek soldiers from different city-states: Corinth, Arcadia, Phocis, Thebes, and a small city called Thespiae. Together they marched to a narrow coastal pass known as Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. At its narrowest point, the pass was so tight that only a small number of soldiers could fight at once. That neutralized the Persian advantage in numbers. For 2 days the strategy worked. Persian forces attacked again and again. Even Xerxes' elite unit, the Immortals, could not break the Greek line. But then a local man named Ephialtes betrayed the Greeks. He revealed a hidden mountain path that allowed the Persian army to move behind the Greek position. When Leonidas learned the Persians were surrounding them, he made a critical decision. He dismissed most of the Greek army. What remained behind was about 1,500 men. The 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians who refused to retreat, and around 400 Thebans whose loyalty remains debated. The Thespians are rarely remembered, yet they stayed voluntarily, knowing the battle was lost. They would die alongside the Spartans. The purpose of the remaining force was not symbolic, it was tactical. They needed to hold the pass long enough for the rest of the Greek army to escape safely. And Leonidas had chosen his Spartans carefully. Every one of the 300 already had a living son. This was not coincidence, it was calculation. If these men died, their families would continue. Their land would pass to heirs. Their sons were already being trained in the agoge. The system would survive. On the final day, Leonidas moved his soldiers into a wider section of the battlefield to inflict maximum damage. The fighting became brutal. Spears shattered, swords broke. Men fought with knives, fists, and teeth. 2 of Xerxes' brothers were killed in the chaos. Eventually, Leonidas himself fell. The Spartans fought desperately to recover his body. 4 times they pushed Persian soldiers back. 4 times the Persians returned. Finally, the surviving Spartans and Thespians retreated to a small hill. There, surrounded and exhausted, they made their final stand. The Persians did not charge. Instead, they killed them from a distance. Arrows, javelins, stones. One by one, the defenders fell. After the battle, Xerxes walked across the battlefield. When he found Leonidas's body, he ordered the king's head cut off and his corpse displayed on a stake. Even Herodotus considered this shocking. Persian kings usually honored brave enemies. But Thermopylae had cost Xerxes far more than he expected. 40 years later, the Spartans recovered Leonidas's remains. They built a shrine in his honor, and they engraved a famous message at Thermopylae. "Stranger, go tell the Spartans that we lie here, obedient to their laws. Not freedom, not glory, but obedience." Within a century, Sparta's power collapsed. Its citizen population kept shrinking. By 371 BC, Sparta could field fewer than 1,000 full citizens in battle. At the Battle of Leuctra, The Theban general Epaminondas defeated them. Then he marched into Messenia. And he did something that destroyed the Spartan system forever. He freed the Helots, the enslaved population that had supported Sparta for more than 200 years. Without Helot labor, Sparta lost its economic foundation. Without that foundation, the warrior society could not survive. The same system that created Leonidas and the 300 had also made Sparta fragile. And when that foundation disappeared, Sparta faded into history. Today, the story of Thermopylae is often told as a story about freedom. But the men who fought there were products of one of the most controlled societies in the ancient world. A system that shaped boys into soldiers, that treated reproduction as state policy, and that turned death itself into a calculated decision. And perhaps that is the real question history leaves us with. When we admire Sparta, what exactly are we admiring? And it reveals something far darker about Spartan society.